leader in providing humanitarian relief. I think that is a subject in itself during the Bengal famine. And an ardent espouser of our culture and traditions. And Professor Ghosh, I think of many of those aspects of his character and contributions. But he was a fierce nationalist, one who was quintessentially Indian, who saw his nation and its prospects through that perspective. Now, what I would like to do today is to address those beliefs and activities of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee that were so critical to the direction of the immediate post-independent India. As we all know, there were some particular causes to which he dedicated his politics and ultimately gave his life. They are crucial for a number of reasons. To begin with, these issues became the basis for a cohesive and alternative way of thinking in this country. These expressions of nationalism drove a debate over many, many decades about the nature of our politics and the nature of our governance. They also influenced our thinking about development and progress, including on how best we can stand on our own feet. And of course, they shaped our approach to engaging the neighborhood particularly and the world at large. At one level, each of these may look like a different subject, a different domain, but the truth is that they represented a holistic worldview, and in real life, each was inseparable from the other. Now, with that as a larger context, allow me to focus on some specific issues that are so deeply, so inextricably associated with Dr. Mukherjee. The first pertains to the accession of Jammu and Kashmir and the ensuing debate about that process and its implications. Now, his position, of course, is known to all of us, and also evoked, of एक देश में दो विधान, दो प्रधान, दो निशान नहीं चलेंगे. The issue itself does not require any further elucidation after so many years and so many experiences. We all know how damaging it has been economically, developmentally, socially, and in terms of national security when Jammu and Kashmir was not fully integrated into the national mainstream. When that was decisively rectified on 5 August 2019, obviously our national integration emerged that much stronger. But as a Minister of External Affairs, what I would like to underline today is how this issue was taken advantage of by external powers vis-à-vis India. Now, we must also appreciate that this assessment is not an outcome of hindsight. Even in 1953, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee conveyed to Prime Minister Nehru that, and I quote him, "No one today could claim that your handling of the Kashmir problem has enhanced our international prestige or has won for us wide international support and sympathy. On the other hand, your policy in this behalf has added to complications both at home and abroad." I repeat, your policy in this behalf has added to complications both at home and abroad. Statesmanship requires that you should re-examine the whole matter dispassionately and instead of being haunted by false internationalism, firmly create conditions for national solidarity based on fair adjustment of different views and input. I particularly stress this reference to complications abroad because that is precisely what came to preoccupy Indian diplomacy for the period thereafter. Interestingly, Sardar Patel too had a similar view when he very presciently cautioned Pandit Nehru about submitting our interest to the judgment of others. With the passage of time, the diplomatic consequences of the early misjudgments on Jammu and Kashmir have probably receded from public memory. It is possible that the younger generations are even unaware of the pressures that our country faced on this issue. But it is nevertheless worth recalling in order to fully appreciate the importance of what we did in August 2019. The question of how weaknesses are exploited in world politics and therefore why we should constantly strengthen our national security. Let me dwell on the global manipulation of the Jammu and Kashmir situation in some detail. This would explain what Dr. Mukherjee meant when he spoke of complications. Many of you would be familiar with the fact that in December 1947, India referred the matter to the United Nations under Article 35 of the UN Charter as a threat to international peace and security created by Pakistan's support to the invaders. There is a separate debate on whether this was the best pathway that India could have chosen at that time. But I won't get into that. Now bear in mind that the British appointed Governor General accepted the instrument of accession in regard to Jammu and Kashmir under the relevant legal provisions. What I would like to highlight more is the responses of the major world powers to an opening that this situation provided. Clearly, as the recent colonial power, the United Kingdom was in the lead. It was also the one with the strongest post-partition agenda and therefore the most mischievous. The UK influenced the passing of a Security Council resolution calling on both India and Pakistan to refrain from any acts that would aggravate the situation. So what you have in effect is that the aggressor and the victim are put on par. Declassified records indicate very clearly that there was a strategy in the Commonwealth Relations Office to bring in Pakistani troops into Jammu and Kashmir to balance out India. The next step was to move through Belgium, which was then the President of the Security Council, to establish a three-nation commission on the matter. Now, in that process, India's main request that Pakistan refrain from assisting the invaders was conveniently dropped. The further sleight of hand happened when the title of the resolution itself was changed from to the India-Pakistan question. Canada then took over from Belgium and carried the Western agenda further forward by pressing for a Pakistani military presence in the place of the invaders if they withdrew. Matters, in fact, reached a stage where India actually had to threaten to leave the Commonwealth to protest against such bias. Now, as the stakes rose higher, the United States and other Western allies also got drawn deeper into this game. Intense pressures were exerted over the next few years, including the threat to withhold assistance of various kinds to India. The turning point, of course, was a 1957 UK-US joint draft by the Soviet Union. The next decade, India's defeat in the 1962 conflict with China saw a renewal of such efforts. The infamous Avril Harriman-Duncan Sandys mission actually sought to arbitrate on Jammu and Kashmir, and this was the most serious of those endeavors. If they failed, it was less due to intent and more because of global circumstances and India's own resistance. The illegal 1963 China-Pakistan agreement on Shaksgam Valley made it awkward for Western nations to make common cause right then with Pakistan. But by 1965, Western partiality for Pakistan's attempt to capture Jammu and Kashmir was apparent once again in the stance that they took on the conflict. Issue moved purely to the bilateral format as a result of the Shimla Agreement. Attempts to interfere in Jammu and Kashmir nevertheless carried on. This happened publicly during the Clinton administration, and even the reaction of Western powers to our 1998 nuclear tests tried to link it to this issue. I repeat, this happened publicly during the Clinton administration, and even the reaction of Western powers to our 1998 nuclear tests tried to link it to this issue. While the Bush administration moderated this, there were nevertheless conversations behind closed doors. Barack Obama did bring up Kashmir during his presidential campaign, and there was a debate actually about Ambassador Holbrooke's remit that some of you may remember. But much more than these diplomatic endeavors, what has hurt our interests more are the actual violation of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that violation was by China. As I noted, this began in 1963 and kept increasing thereafter through connectivity initiatives. We later saw that develop into the so-called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Each of these efforts has been countered and will continue to be countered. But keeping all this in mind, we must appreciate mainstreaming Jammu and Kashmir. We have not just strengthened national integrity, but also enhanced national security. And this is absolutely vital as India raises its profile on the global stage. Certainly, our Western partners today are much more understanding. But let that not obfuscate the fact that the real change has been in our own policies in respect of Jammu and Kashmir. A question closely related to the mishandling of the Jammu and Kashmir issue is that of India's misreading of Pakistan, its intent and its policies. This too is a long-standing issue and has cast its shadow over many decades on our well-being and security. And here too, there has been a decisive shift in Indian thinking after 2014. In the case of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the matter acquires particular salience because it was the cause of his resignation from the Union Cabinet. He shares his assessment candidly with the Parliament on 19th April 1950 in words that still resonate with all of us. And he says, I quote him, "I have never felt happy about our attitude towards Pakistan. It has been weak, halting, and inconsistent. Our goodness or inaction has been interpreted as weakness by Pakistan. It has made Pakistan more and more intransigent and made us suffer all the greater and even lowered us in the estimation of our own people. On every important occasion, we have remained on the defensive and failed to expose or counteract the designs of Pakistan aimed at us." Unquote. Now ask yourself, this could well be the thoughts of the average Indian citizen in the aftermath of the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai. Indeed, if there are two figures of that era who displayed strategic clarity about Pakistan, Patel, and the other was Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee. Apart from the accession of Jammu and Kashmir and the treatment of minorities, about which I will speak, this was most notably on display where Dr. Mukherjee was concerned in regard to his own province of Bengal, and that is something, Professor Ghosh, which you pointed out. Once the concept of partitioning India was accepted by the Congress, Dr. Mukherjee put all his energies into ensuring that the metropolis of Kolkata and as much of Bengal as possible stayed with India. To that end, he convened a cross-section of what we would call influencers today, and led an agitation that compelled a positive outcome. Today, we cannot even contemplate the consequence of a different result. You can only imagine what it would have meant for the conduct of our foreign policy. It is therefore natural that this is regarded as one of his great contributions, certainly by nationalist opinion in our country. While there is a larger point that Dr. Mukherjee was making with reference to our approach to Pakistan, his specific analysis of the Nehru-Liaquat Pact is also relevant for policy responses towards Pakistan. Do remember that this pact was actually the precipitating factor for his resignation. There is much that he warned about the treatment of minorities, which unfortunately came true in the decades that passed. He underlined that the pact tries to ignore the basic implications of an intolerant state, that the declared positions of the Pakistani government undermined any sense of minority security, and that was giving life to these policies. But again, as Foreign Minister, it is his remarks on the India-Pakistan equation that I find to be of greatest interest, and, I must say, of continued relevance. When it came to protection of minorities, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee stressed that, and I quote him, "Today, there is a general impression that there has been failure both on the part of India and Pakistan to protect the minorities. The fact, however, is just the reverse of it. A hostile propaganda has also been carried on in some sections of the foreign press. This is a libel on India, and the truth must be made known to all those who desire to know it." Unquote. Apparently, some things have not changed in some quarters, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. But let me finish this point. When it comes to the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, Dr. Mukherjee expresses reservations that actually predict much of what has gone wrong, not just on this matter, but on broader ties with Pakistan. He declares that, quote, "India and Pakistan are made to appear equally guilty, while Pakistan was clearly the aggressor," unquote. And he points out that when Pakistan violates agreements, there is no remedy open to India. In his view, again I quote him, "Any agreement with sanction will not offer any solution." So, in 2023, 7 decades after these insights on Pakistan, it is essential that we reflect on the judgments that Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee bequeathed to us. This is all the more so as the equivalence between India and Pakistan that was so troubling even in the initial years after independence morphed into a larger hyphenation. For decades, India and Pakistan were uttered in the same breath, and their differences made to look like a natural agenda left over from the partition. There were even periods when the military regime in our neighboring country was held out as an example of development. The 1971 outcome obviously changed much of this, but not as decisively as we would have hoped. Pakistan kept trying to create an artificial balance and was actively supported in that endeavor by both China and Western nations. This even went to the extent of assisting and facilitating its nuclear and missile programs. And worse still, Pakistan increasingly resorted to cross-border terrorism to bring India to the table. But if truth be told, our own policies were not sufficiently robust to firmly discourage this approach. Instead of confronting the cross-border nature of terrorism squarely, because it was emanating from Pakistan, we even briefly appeared to be open to a narrative that suggested that both India and Pakistan were victims of terrorism. This was exactly the false equivalence that Dr. Mukherjee had in his time. So what is the answer? We have seen that unfold over the last 9 years in a variety of ways. To begin with, this means taking a clear-cut position on the unacceptability of terrorism. It is obviously not in our national interest that we normalize terrorism by carrying on with the rest of the relationship as usual. That message has been sent loud and clear. Where egregious actions of cross-border terrorism are concerned, the operations at Uri and Balakot are as much a shift in our thinking as in our actions. But it is also important to mobilize the international community through advocacy and awareness creation. Only then can we be successful in delegitimizing terrorism. As a result of our persistent efforts, there is widespread understanding today that this is not a threat to India alone, that the UN Security Council's Counter-Terrorism Committee held a meeting at a 2611 site in Mumbai was a statement of no small significance. It is also our endeavor to get global platforms and conferences, whether we speak of the G20, which is we are in the middle of, or meetings like No Money for Terror, or bilateral and plurilateral mechanisms, and recent US spotlight strongly on such threats. The listing process created by the UN Security Council 1267 sanctions, and there are no prizes for guessing which country features prominently in it. While matters related to Jammu and Kashmir and to Pakistan's behavior naturally come to mind, it would be doing injustice to Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's legacy if we do not recognize fully his tenure as the nation's first Minister of Industry and Supply. In that capacity, he had a particular contribution to make to the establishment of the Chittaranjan Locomotive Factory and the Sindri Fertilizer Corporation. And he had a significant role in the transformation of the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited as we know it today. Here too, allow me to take a foreign policy perspective. In a competitive world where vulnerabilities are leveraged, it is essential that India builds deep strengths and modern capabilities. It is only then that we can adequately assure national security. While that may have been the broad objective over these 8 decades, it is also a fact that in the era of the open economy, this has led to great complacency on this front. We have struggled in particular to deal with competitors of greater scale and large subsidies. Our own policies, till a decade ago, have not been adequately supportive of promoting industry. In fact, there is apparently even a body of opinion that believes that we should not even be going in that direction. This has implications not just for employment creation, but even in terms of leading to dangerous dependencies. The Modi government has endeavored to course correct through a number of steps that include making it easier to do business, offering production-linked incentives, promoting exports, supporting small and medium enterprises, building the enabling infrastructure, and expanding the skills and talents of our society. These are all the building blocks of Atmanirbhar Bharat. And obviously there are many more. The point I wish to stress is that the outlook that Dr. Mukherjee displayed as Industry Minister is today one which guides us as we prepare to ascend the global ladder. There is a significant set of international conversations taking place today about the need for reliable and resilient supply chains. In the digital domain, there are concerns about ensuring trust and transparency. When it comes to critical and emerging technologies, you will hear of the need for trusted collaboration. All these constitute opportunities for us to forge the right partnerships and ensure stronger national capabilities. Many of you, I'm sure, would have followed the Prime Minister's recent path-breaking visit to the United States and would appreciate the larger objectives that we sought to achieve during that visit. But to do that, we need leadership, vision and beliefs as much as we need right policies. If we could produce a COVID vaccine, deploy a 5G stack, or undertake a Mars mission, this speaks for the level of confidence in the nation today. I do not really need to remind this audience of Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's commitment to our culture and history. But here again, permit me to take a foreign policy perspective. We have all seen a major economic rebalancing in our times. India is already the 5th largest economy and poised to grow rapidly even further. The very G20, whose presidency we all celebrate collectively, is a reflection of how much economic capabilities have geographically dispersed since our independence. It has an accompanying political facet, again expressed through new mechanisms, platforms and influences. We could talk of the Quad, or of the BRICS, or of the International Solar Alliance, or of the Voice of the Global South Summit. And indeed, it is visible in our own international standing, in our growing influence, and in the rising expectations that the world has of India. But if the world order is to really change, there has to be a parallel cultural rebalancing as well. It is evident that the Western dominance of the past is today diluting, but it is equally important that the gaps are not filled just by others. This is all about entering the world of soft power and the importance of shaping narratives. And that can only happen when we are true to ourselves, to our identity and to our traditions, which is why it is important that India should be Bharat. As President of the Mahabodhi Society of India, Dr. Mukherjee was also the driving force in forging links with Buddhist nations, especially some of our neighbors. He played a personal role in the return of holy relics from the United Kingdom and their display in Southeast Asia and Myanmar. Today, those very activities are being further developed through recent initiatives like the Dharma Dhamma conferences, the restoration of the Ananda temple in Bagan in Myanmar, or the solarification of Buddhist sites in Sri Lanka, or the digitization of manuscripts in the Ganden monastery of Mongolia. Indeed, the importance we attach to our Buddhist heritage was only recently underlined when all the G20 development ministers visited Sarnath after the meeting. So, as we move in the Amrit Kal to build a new India, its building blocks must be sharply perceived. New India means closing vulnerabilities, it means responding to challenges, it means learning to compete, it means winning the mind games, and it means shaping the narratives. It means make in India, it means vocal for local, and it means Atmanirbhar Bharat. It means taking pride in being Indian. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, through his thoughts, actions, and contributions, will always be a powerful inspiration in this regard. I thank you all for joining me today at an occasion where we all recognize this.